My name is Jonathan Vale, and on the morning of January 6, 2025, I died for 23 minutes. I was in my penthouse suite, overlooking the icy rooftops of Manhattan. I had just gotten off a tense call with the CFO of one of my companies. Another lawsuit, another $1 million headache. I poured myself a glass of scotch, even though it was barely past 10 a.m., and sat down at the grand piano I hadn't touched in years. The cold keys under my fingers felt like strangers. I was exhausted. No, more than exhausted. I was empty. Then it happened. A searing pain shot through my chest. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. My glass crashed to the marble floor, shattering just before I did. The last thing I heard was the faint voice of my assistant screaming into the phone. "He's not breathing." I remember floating. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I saw myself from above, lying lifeless on the floor. Paramedics rushed in, their voices a muffled blur. They pounded on my chest, injected something into my arm, placed paddles on my body. "Clear," one of them shouted. I watched as my body convulsed. But I felt nothing, no fear, no pain, just a strange, surreal calm. Then the room faded. The white ceilings dissolved into something brighter, something beyond description. I was rising, drawn upward through a tunnel that shimmered with a light I couldn't look at directly, but also couldn't look away from. The higher I went, the more weight seemed to fall off me, like I was shedding the burdens I didn't even know I was carrying. When the tunnel ended, I found myself in a realm unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just beautiful, it was perfect. The colors were alive. The air carried a melody that spoke directly to my soul. There were no shadows. Everything was pure, radiant, soaked in peace. And then he came. At first, I didn't recognize him. There was no formal announcement, no thunderous voice from the clouds, just a presence. A man clothed in light, yet somehow more solid and real than anything I had ever known. His eyes, oh God, his eyes, they looked into the deepest corners of me. And still he loved me. "Jonathan," he said, "you were not supposed to come yet, but I brought you here to show you something." I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't work. Words didn't seem to matter in that place. My thoughts were as loud as speech, and he heard them all. I asked, "Who are you?" He smiled, not with amusement, but with affection. "I am." I didn't need an explanation. My soul knew before my mind caught up. It was Jesus. And in that moment, every dollar I'd ever made, every tower I'd built, every deal I'd crushed into submission, they all vanished into dust. I felt small, naked, but I didn't feel condemned. I felt seen, not as a billionaire, not as a titan of industry, but as a broken man who had lost his way. He gestured, and suddenly we were standing in front of what looked like a vast tapestry of light. Scenes from my life played across it, moments I had long forgotten, moments I had buried. My daughter's ballet recital I missed to close a merger. My wife sobbing alone in our kitchen while I was entertaining clients in Dubai. The layoffs I signed off on with a shrug. These were the true costs, Jesus said. You thought money could shield you, but it became your master. I wanted to fall to my knees. I wanted to rip my soul open and scream. But there was no time for shame. Not here. Jonathan, he continued, you can go back, but you must tell them what you saw, what you learned. I begged him not to send me away. I didn't want to return, not to the emptiness, not to the cold steel of Wall Street. But his gaze pierced through my resistance. You still have work to do. And with those words, everything vanished. I was slammed back into my body like a train crashing into a station. My chest exploded with pain as I gasped for air. The paramedics shouted, "We've got a pulse." I was alive, but I was no longer the man who had collapsed in that penthouse. I don't know how long I stood there, suspended in that place between time and eternity, but it felt like everything, my entire existence, had been reduced to a still frame. I watched my body from above, lying motionless on the cold marble floor of my penthouse, surrounded by paramedics doing everything they could to revive me. But I wasn't anxious. I wasn't scared. There was a peace so thick, so consuming, I could almost drink it. That peace, it wasn't for me. It was coming from someone else. Then I saw him. I didn't have to ask who he was. My soul recognized him instantly. It was Jesus, not the historical figure from textbooks or the stained glass version I'd occasionally glimpsed when my chauffeur drove past a church. No, this was a living, breathing Son of God. His eyes were like oceans, piercing yet tender, filled with a sorrow that I somehow knew wasn't for him. It was for me. He didn't speak with his mouth. He spoke directly to my spirit, and I heard him say, "Jonathan, what did you do with the life I gave you?" That single question felt like an earthquake in my soul, not because it was harsh, but because it was perfectly just. And then the visions began. I was no longer in the heavenly realm. I was moving faster than thought through moments of my life, not highlights like a greatest hits reel. These were the forgotten corners, the dark rooms I had locked away. I saw my daughter's 10th birthday. I had missed it for a board meeting in Zurich. I saw my ex-wife crying behind closed doors, praying for a version of me that had long been consumed by Wall Street. I saw my employees, souls I had used and discarded, some of them financially ruined by decisions I made from a place of greed. And I felt it. I felt what they felt. Every wound, every word, every broken promise. It wasn't punishment. It was revelation. Then Jesus showed me something else. My bank vault, the physical place where I had stored literal billions. But it was empty, not just of money, but of meaning. And as I stared at that emptiness, I heard him again. "You were rich in the world's eyes, Jonathan, but bankrupt in heaven." It crushed me. I wanted to fall to my knees and scream, but I had no body. I had no voice, only sorrow. Then he placed his hand on me, pure light and love, and suddenly the sorrow turned into something else, a chance. He showed me what could be. He showed me the life I could have lived, a life of purpose, generosity, humility. I saw myself building orphanages, holding my granddaughter's hand at church, laughing around a dinner table with my family restored. And most of all, I saw myself whole, not rich, not poor, just free, Then he looked at me one final time and said, "Go back, Jonathan. You must choose differently." In an instant, I slammed back into my body like lightning. I gasped and the EMTs jumped. I was alive. Somehow I was alive. And I knew this second chance wasn't just about me. The moment I awoke in that realm of light, the sense of being dead no longer mattered. In that place, time dissolved, and every sensation I had ever known was replaced by something unnameable, something eternal. I was standing or floating, I don't even know, beside Jesus. And what he showed me next unraveled everything I thought I knew about success. He didn't speak with thunder. There were no harsh rebukes. His words came through my being like waves of absolute truth, each one striking chords of my soul I had long buried. We stood in front of what looked like a living mural, and it played like a movie, my life in moments. Not the grand business acquisitions, not the television interviews or ribbon cuttings. Those meant nothing here. Instead, I saw my daughter's 6th birthday, and I wasn't there. I saw the night. My wife sobbed silently in bed as I stayed late at the office to close a deal that netted us another $80 million. I saw my brother call me in desperation. He was going through a divorce, and I hit decline because I was hosting a hedge fund gala. I hadn't just missed moments. I had failed souls. Then Jesus looked at me, not with fury, but with compassion so penetrating it shattered me. He said nothing at first. He didn't need to. The vision expanded. I saw ripple effects. The man I laid off by email, whose family lost their home. The employee whose ideas I stole and passed off as my own, who left the industry in bitterness. The charities I turned down, not because we couldn't afford to give, but because I thought they didn't benefit our brand. Jonathan, Jesus finally said, his voice full of sorrow and mercy, "You measured wealth in what you held, but I measured in what you give." In an instant, the realm shifted. I was no longer just seeing my choices. I was shown what could have been, the life I could have lived. There was a version of me who uses wealth to rescue girls from trafficking, who built hospitals, who sat at dinner tables and read bedtime stories. That Jonathan still had the same business mind, but he was anchored by compassion, driven by eternity, not ego. And Jesus gave me a choice. He said, "I can take you home now, but if you return to love, return to serve, return to lead them away from the lie." He didn't say, "Lead them to me," outright, but I knew that's what he meant. Through my repentance, through my life, through radical humility and reversal of values, the world knew me as a titan of finance. I would return as a broken vessel, filled with something far more valuable. Then the vision began to dim, and I felt the weight of Earth's gravity pulling me back. I cried out, "Wait, just one more moment in your presence." But it was time to return to the world I had shaped with my greed, and to reshape it, this time with grace. When I awoke in my hospital bed, blinking under the dim fluorescence of ICU lights, it was like returning to a different planet. The sterile room, the hum of machines, the soft shuffle of nurses. It all felt surreal, hollow, even intrusive. I had seen eternity. I had stood before love incarnate. And now I was back in this brittle, flickering world, tasked with a mission that felt far heavier than any portfolio I had ever managed. My first visitor was Dr. Hammond. His face was taut with disbelief, like he had seen a ghost. "Jonathan, I don't know how to explain this," he muttered, voice shaking. "You were gone for 23 minutes. No heartbeat, no oxygen. You shouldn't be here. But you are. I know," I whisper hoarsely, "and I'm not the same." The coming weeks were marked by silence and reflection. My assistants, once buzzing about my apartment like bees in a hive, were dismissed. My phone remained off. The high-rise penthouse, which had once felt like a throne room, now felt like a mausoleum, an echo chamber of pride and isolation. I wandered through it barefoot, running my hand along the marble countertops, looking at the family portraits that had grown dusty and outdated, as if I had died long before my heart stopped. Jesus had shown me everything I had missed, not just business meetings or birthday parties, but chances, divine chances, to love better, to speak softer, to forgive faster. I had turned my children's laughter into numbers on a screen. I had bartered intimacy for acquisition, and the currency I hoarded could not purchase what my soul truly craved. The first thing I did was call Margaret. She didn't pick up the first time, or the second. On the third, her voice cracked to the phone like brittle glass. "Jonathan?" I choked on my words. "I'm sorry for everything." There was silence, then a soft weeping. She hadn't expected me to ever say those words. Not sincerely. Not after all this time. The next day, I went to see her in person. The doorman hesitated at first, recognizing me from the headlines, but not from the man I had become. I looked smaller now, unshaven, stripped of my expensive armor. But Margaret let me in. When she opened the door, I saw the pain I had left in my wake, etched into her eyes, her posture, her guarded expression. But as I told her everything about the heart attack, the vision, the warning, something softened, not because of eloquence, not because I deserved it, but because grace has a way of entering cracked places. "I saw Jesus," I said, "and he showed me the truth about myself, about you, about all of us." And then I said the words that had been burning in my chest ever since I awoke. "I don't want money to be my legacy. I want love to be." She sat across from me, fingers trembling. "You think it's too late?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "Not if I start today." I left her apartment with a promise, not to win her back, but to become the man I should have been when I still had her. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. My mission was no longer acquisition. It was redemption. Within days, I contacted my lawyers and financial team. The same men and women who once praised my aggressive strategies now stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "You want to liquidate?" Mr. Rafferty blinked. "All of it?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Every cent. But, Jonathan, your holdings are diversified across 3 continents. You have real estate in Dubai, tech in California, arms in Switzerland. I don't care. Sell it all and use it for something that matters." They pushed back. Some threatened to resign. Others accused me of having a breakdown. But I stood my ground. I established a foundation that week, the Veil Trust for Restoration and Hope. Its sole mission, rebuilding what greed had broken. We poured funds into underfunded schools, addiction recovery programs, shelters for battered women, and support for families torn apart by divorce. And always quietly. No media circus. No plaques bearing my name. Just quiet, unseen mercy. But the hardest restoration was still ahead. My children. My daughter, Emilia, was 29 and living in Seattle. We hadn't spoken in years. When I showed up unannounced, she didn't recognize me at first. I looked older, softer, more human. "Dad," she said, blinking. "What were you doing here?" "Trying to make things right," I whispered. We sat on a park bench beneath a canopy of rustling trees as I told her the story. Her eyes welled with tears not just from pain, but from longing. Children don't stop loving their fathers. They just run out of ways to ask for it. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed everything," I replied. One by one, I reached out to all my children. Some came quickly, others took time. But one by one, grace did what money never could. It reopened hearts. And as I watched my fortune dwindle, but my soul swell, I knew what Jesus had meant. This was a treasure that could not be stolen by moth or rust. This was the kind of wealth that rippled into eternity. By the end of that year, I no longer lived in the penthouse. I had donated it to a program that housed formerly incarcerated fathers seeking reconciliation with their families. I moved into a modest apartment near the river. Nothing grand, but filled with laughter, photographs, home-cooked meals, and joy that no bank statement could reflect. The next few weeks after Jonathan gave everything away felt like waking up from a long, haunted dream. He had lived in 40,000 square feet of polished marble and glass. Now he found peace in a modest apartment in Queens. There were nights he'd sit by the window, watching kids play in the street, and tears would well in his eyes. Not because he missed the wealth, but because he missed everything it had stolen from him. His wife, his daughter, his brother, and even his ability to feel joy without guilt. But he wasn't the same man anymore. Jesus had shown him what mattered, and there was no going back. Jonathan reached out to his daughter Rachel first. She hadn't spoken to him in over 7 years. He remembered the last time he saw her, standing in the rain at her college graduation while he sat in the back row, too busy with a hedge fund merger to stay more than 10 minutes. When he called, she didn't answer. He sent letters, long letters handwritten with trembling fingers. It wasn't until the 5th letter that she called. Her voice was cautious, wounded, but open. They met in a quiet diner in Brooklyn. She sat across from him, now a woman with her own life and her own scars. He wept before her, told her everything, told her about the light, the truth, the moments Jesus replayed for him, the birthday he missed, the violin recital he never showed up to, the time she waited by the window with her dress on, hoping he'd come to the school dance with her. He didn't try to defend himself. He let the silence between them hold the pain. When she finally reached across the table and held his hand, he felt the first seed of healing take root. One by one, he began reconciling with his brother Elijah, whom he had cut off over a lawsuit, with Anna, his former wife, who now lived quietly in New Jersey. She had remarried, and he didn't try to undo her new life. Instead, he wrote her a long letter of apology, thanking her for raising Rachel with grace when he didn't have the courage to be a father. She didn't write back, but she didn't tear up the letter either. That was enough for him. Then came the mission. Jonathan started going to shelters and food pantries, not to donate money, but to serve. At first, no one recognized him. He wore jeans and a faded hoodie, his hand shaking the first time he held a ladle at a soup kitchen in Harlem. One night, a teenage boy asked, "Didn't you used to be that billionaire on the news?" Jonathan smiled and replied, "I used to be a lot of things." He shared his story in churches, community centers, and parks. He didn't glamorize his wealth or exaggerate his fall. He spoke with raw honesty about how the pursuit of success numbed his soul, about the tunnel of light, about the calm voice of Jesus saying, "You love what you could count, but not what counted." He said that line everywhere he went. It became the anchor of his message. People listened. Some wept, some scoffed, but many were moved. And slowly, stories began to ripple back. A man in Pittsburgh sold his luxury car and paid for his sister's cancer treatment. A woman in Los Angeles forgave her estranged mother and started feeding the homeless every Sunday. A hedge fund analyst in London left his job and became a teacher. None of it was dramatic or televised, but in the quiet corners of the world, hearts were shifting because one man dared to say, "I saw what eternity looked like, and I'd trade every diamond on earth just to hear his voice again." Jonathan's story reached a filmmaker who invited him to share it on a small documentary project. He agreed, not for fame, but because he believed people needed to know that hell wasn't just fire. It was emptiness. And heaven wasn't gold streets. It was being known and loved by the one who made you. Late one evening, Jonathan stood by a lake in upstate New York. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue across the rippling water. He thought of the billions he once had, the yachts, the parties, the gala speeches and glossy magazine features. None of it compared to this moment, barefoot in the grass, his daughter beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. She had forgiven him fully now. They went to church together every Sunday. She called him Dad again. He prayed silently, not asking for anything, just whispering thanks. He didn't need more signs or miracles. He had already died once. And now, finally, he was learning how to live. The days that followed my return felt like walking through fire, cleansing, painful, and necessary. There was no manual for what I was doing. No blueprint for how to rebuild a life that had been built on the wrong foundation. I wasn't just downsizing my lifestyle. I was dismantling an empire, brick by brick, investment by investment, deal by deal. And with every layer of excess I stripped away, I uncovered something I hadn't felt in decades. Freedom. The news caught on, of course. Billionaire gives away fortune after near-death experience. The headlines read, "I tried to avoid the cameras, the interviews, the journalists camped outside my building." This wasn't about spectacle. It was about repentance, rebirth, redemption. I remember the first night I spent in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. No penthouse views, no concierge service, just silence, the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, and a small wooden cross I had bought at a local church gift shop hanging above my new bed. I stared at that cross until I fell asleep. It was the most peaceful sleep I'd had in decades. My children were hesitant at first. After years of being neglected in favor of meetings and mergers, I didn't blame them, but I pursued them the way I had once pursued power, not with manipulation, but with brokenness, with humility. I showed up, I listened, I cried with them, I told them the truth. Slowly, brick by emotional brick, we rebuilt what had been destroyed. Emma, my daughter, was the first to forgive me. She placed a hand on my shoulder one evening at dinner and said, "I think I see who you really are now, Dad." That moment broke me in a way that no corporate failure ever had, not because it hurt, but because I knew I didn't deserve it. Yet I was receiving grace. I began speaking at churches, rehab centers, even prisons, not as a guru, not as a success story, but as a warning. I told them how easy it is to gain the world and lose your soul. How seductive success is when it masquerades as security. I shared the vision Jesus gave me, the one etched forever in my spirit. Men and women worshiping the God of gold while their families, their hearts, and their eternity were slipping away. I wasn't preaching, at least not in the traditional sense. I was pleading. At one small gathering, a young man came up to me with tears in his eyes. He was on the verge of closing a multi-million-dollar tech deal. "I've worked for this my whole life," he said. "But after hearing you, I realize I've never hugged my son goodnight." He didn't need my advice. He needed an invitation to come home, and I gave it to him. I kept a single investment, a nonprofit foundation that I renamed the Vault Eternal. Its mission? To support families, reconciliation, and faith-based education for underprivileged youth. Instead of stock options, we measure returns in restored marriages, reunified families, and young hearts ignited with purpose. One afternoon, as I sat on a bench outside a small church in Queens, an elderly woman sat next to me. She had no idea who I was, and I didn't tell her. She simply looked up and said, "You know, sometimes the richest people are the ones who finally learn how to cry." I nodded, because I knew exactly what she meant. I never went back to being Jonathan Vail, CEO of Vail Global Holdings. That man died on a marble floor in Manhattan. The man who lived again was someone new, someone lighter, someone freer, someone who no longer feared death, because he had already faced judgment and received mercy. And now I say this to you, whoever you are reading or hearing my story. What is your treasure? Where is it stored? Will it last? Jesus didn't show me the horrors of my soul to shame me. He showed them to save me. And he's offering the same to you. You don't need to die to see what I saw. But you do need to live, really live. Lie with open hands. Lie with a heart that values people more than possessions. Live as though eternity is real, because it is. This is my call to you, not as a billionaire, not even as a man who died, but as a soul who has shown mercy. Forgive freely. love relentlessly, give extravagantly, and above all, follow Jesus. He is the only treasure that lasts. If this story moved you, I invite you to comment below. What are you storing in your vault? What has Jesus shown you about your priorities? Don't just watch this story, become one. Let others read your testimony. Let your voice inspire someone else to walk away from the empty pursuit of wealth and into the fullness of purpose. Your comment could be the wake-up call someone else needs. Jesus is waiting. Are you ready?